Great presentation tonight from our friend Mani, who's running away right there in the blue shirt. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. And we're going to do a beginner Drupal Q&A session, kind of as a team. So we're gonna have a session. Anyone can ask anything. No question is off limits, and we'll crowdsource the answers from the various levels of expertise that are here, and we'll see how we do with this. We'll have a couple quick closing remarks, and then afterwards there is drinks at Bill's Bar, which is downstairs. You can enter on 51st Street. So please join us for beverages and socializing right after we're done. Sounds good. All right. Before I get into the talks and this stuff, I would like to point out, for those of you who don't know, that today is the 1-year anniversary of Drupalgeddon. So just throwing that out there, a little bit of Drupal trivia. 1 year. What? I don't know, but it was. I checked it before I came. It was today that the security announcement went out. Yeah. So for those of you, who want to celebrate or raise a glass, happy Drupalgeddon anniversary. Okay. 2 years? No, 2016. 2015? The 2-year anniversary. I'll have to double check that. But it was today. It's today's date. So thank you. Okay, so we're going to have, like I said, Mani's going to talk about application monitoring and alerting. So we'll hear from him in just a couple minutes. And I already kind of started to describe the beginner Q&A. We'll get there. Our organizers. So we have a crack team of organizers who organize this event. We like to make sure that you can see, yay, because we want applause. Yay, clap, clap. Thank you. We want to make sure that everybody knows who organizes the event, so that if you have suggestions or feedback or anything you want to tell us about the event, that you know exactly who to go to. If you want to give a talk, for example, and we'll talk about that in a minute, you know who to come and speak with. So these are your organizers. The venue, we are right here in beautiful 30 Rockefeller Center, is sponsored by NBCU Technology, which is no longer true. It is now sponsored by NBCU ONTS, Operations and Technical Services, because we like to change our acronyms as often as we possibly can. But thank you, of course, to NBC. Yay. And then the after party is sponsored by our good friends at Fastly. So thank you to our good friends at Fastly. Yay. And photos and hashtag. That's yeah. We take photos here. We encourage other people to take photos here to make your friends and neighbors and coworkers jealous that they were not here. If you do take photos, please use the hashtag Drupal NYC on all the things, on meetup.com/Drupal NYC, on Twitter, on Instagram, and all those things. Please use that hashtag. Thank you. Questions, comments, concerns? No, we're good. Yeah. All right. Okay, Slack. We have Slack. It's not that new anymore, but we have Slack now. Our channel is Drupal. Our team is drupalnyc.slack.com. You can join by going to drupal.nyc/chat. We highly encourage everybody who participates and comes to these meetups to join our Slack channels. All of the organizers are on there all the time. A whole bunch of the folks from the Drupal community in general are on there. It's a good place to ask some questions, and Mai would like to say a few words about that.
I just want to say that there is a question right now in the community Slack asking if anyone has worked on a D8 migration. So if you want to lend your expertise, you can definitely jump in the channel and help somebody out.
There you go. A perfect example. Well-timed. Thank you to whoever we planted to do that. But yeah, so join the Slack channel and keep in touch with us and find out about things going on in the New York Drupal community. All right. Upcoming events. Drupal Play Days in just a couple days. You go to meetup.com/Drupal NYC, find out all the info about that. But Drupal Play Day, for those of you who don't know about it, is a really good opportunity to kind of show up with your laptop, work out the problem that you're working on, work on the site that you're working on, work on the code that you're working on with other Drupal-y folks, and you can bounce ideas off each other, try and get a little bit of help, give help to the person sitting to your left, get help from the person sitting to your right, that sort of thing. The Drupal GovCon, I believe is in DC, is, right? someone say yes? Yes? I said yes. July 31st through August 2nd. So check out drupalgovcon.org to find info about that. And get your train tickets early because Amtrak has limited service during the summer because Penn Station is falling apart. Drupal Camp Costa Rica. Now this is one that I did not know about and I need to get on. Drupal Camp Costa Rica. What? I'm sure it's an excellent camp, but it's also in Costa Rica, so that helps. So that's coming up in August, drupalcamp.cr. Check that out. And then Decoupled Developer Days I'm going to talk about in just a second, so we'll get to that. But that's August 19th and 20th, right here in this very room. Be there. And here we go, Drupal Decoupled Developer Days. So this is going to be a 2-day event. It's a single track of sessions all about decoupled architecture strategies for how to actually go about decoupling, what to do on your front ends, what to do at the back end, how to get the content from here to there, what are the pitfalls, all the good information about decoupling. They're going to have a pretty good slate of speakers from the proposals that have been submitted already. So please definitely check it out. Like I said, it's going to be here. Saturday is going to be sessions. Sunday is going to be sprinting and collaborating with other folks. There will definitely be sessions that are focused primarily on front end frameworks and architecture for a decoupled site that aren't necessarily Drupal specific. And then there's going to be talks and sessions that are definitely going to be focused more on the back end side of things. Yes, you in the glasses. Session submission closed, I think, yesterday, but I suspect that, no promises, none at all, but I suspect that if someone submitted a session this week, they could probably convince them to consider it. Because I know that they have not yet gone through all of them and decided on the slate yet, so yeah. Please do register. There is a registration fee, so check it out and figure out if you're going to be able to make it. There's going to be a limited number of tickets, and we're definitely expecting that it's going to sell out. So please do register. You can go to the Eventbrite link that's here, eventbrite.com/blah, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it's going to be a good time. And like I said, I encourage everybody to come and check it out. Cool. All right, open camps. Is someone talking about open camps, or am I talking about open camps? Holing's talking about open camps. Holing.
Hello. This is a public service announcement. So open camps, I'm just taking the quote from the first sentence of their website. It's the world's largest mission-driven open source conference with 10,000 plus attendees joining for 40 plus conferences and events, Drupal Camp NYC being one of them, featuring 600 plus sessions on dozens of open source technologies. So there are a few details that needs to be finalized, but right now we're set for November 2017 and somewhere in Midtown Manhattan. And we will hear from the Open Camps organizers in the coming meetups. So watch the following space, opencamps.org, and that's opencamps.org. Thank you.
All right. In the past, we've been able to have that event at the UN. I don't know if that's going to happen again this year, but I'm not sure. Who knows? I'm looking around. Anyone know? No? Hopefully, but maybe not. We'll see. Stay tuned. Okay, there we go. All right, thank you, Holing. All right, the Drupal Association. Please do join the Drupal Association if you have not done so already. For those of you who are not aware, the Drupal Association is the organization that takes responsibility for growing the community, things like Drupal.org itself, Drupal.org proper, which takes quite a bit of work these days to maintain and improve. So the membership, becoming a member really does help the community as a whole to kind of serve itself and grow itself and improve itself. So it's really easy to do. Drupal.org/association/support. You can join for as an individual member. You can also have your company join. They have a kind of a two-tiered thing. So I encourage you even more so to get your companies to join as well. But yeah, please do join the Drupal Association. If you have questions, ask. and we will answer them. Or ask later, maybe during the Q&A. Okay. Interested in speaking. So the way that we typically run this, this meetup is we have lightning talks, we have in-depth talks, sometimes we have several in-depth talks and one lightning talk, sometimes we have one long talk, sometimes we have a bunch of lightning talks. And we're very, very interested in getting feedback about speakers from kind of 2 points of view. One, if there is a particular topic you would like to talk about, we want to hear from you. If there's a particular topic you would like to hear about, we want to hear from you. We definitely want to get that feedback from you folks to make sure that we're kind of getting the best quality speakers, the most on-topic speakers that we can. So, you know, let us know, give us feedback, and volunteer to give a talk. It's good. It's a good, warm, fuzzy feeling that you get when you're done. Yeah. All right. So if you have an idea or you want to suggest something that you want to hear about, you can go to Drupal.nyc/suggest and let us know about that, or you can come up to any one of the organizers, and we will make sure that you are talking to the right people, so that we can work out the best time to give your talk or try and find a good person to give a talk on that topic. All right. Great. So that's my new intern. That's why I was out for a little while. Okay, who is hiring? Raise hand. You're hiring. Susie's hiring. Mai is hiring. NVC, I'm hiring. Who is looking? Yeah, a little bit. Okay, there were some hands. There were some hands. Okay. So those who are hiring, take note of those who are looking. But we like to do this. So NBC is always hiring. You kind of know who NBC is, so yeah, we're always hiring at various levels and various stuff. So if you're interested, come talk. Mai. Who do you work for?
I'm first. Yes, I work for a awesome nonprofit called DoSomething.org, and we're in the business of behavior change so that we can activate the largest generation of young people to do social good and care about solving real problems that we face. So we're hiring for a software engineer role. There's flexibility in terms of like skills, so it's fine if you have only front-end skills or back-end skills, or both. And the application stack will be PHP, might have some Drupal work, but will also involve some Laravel apps, which also uses the Symfony framework, as well as other stacks. So there's plenty of opportunity for growth and learning and collaborating with your team and doing something awesome for the world.
I'm hiring a Drupal 8 developer. There's a catch, it's in Philly. And this is for Comcast, and it is a giant, shiny, decoupled project that is in the healthcare space. We're trying to create efficiencies in healthcare. So D8, Symfony, React is a big plus. Node is a big plus. We have a couple native apps. It's a very interesting project. So come play with us in Philly. I'm hiring one developer for sure, regular level. We may be hiring a senior developer in the next month in addition to the other one. I don't have one, but I'll get in touch. I'm a contractor.
All right. Thank you, Mai, and thank you, Susie. Okay. Here we go. Intros. Take a couple minutes and introduce yourself to someone who you don't know. And then I will rudely interrupt you in about 3 minutes while you're in the middle of a conversation that you finally just got started. So introduce. Go. like that. Yeah. That's pretty cool. Right. Right. And no one bothered you. Well, so go get one. All right. And stop. All right. So I rudely interrupted you as promised, but that means that you now are in the middle of a conversation with someone. So when you get downstairs later at Bill's bar, you can just finish the conversation. See how well that works? All right. Yay. You. Okay. So our first talk is going to be from Mani Soundarajan. Yes. It's only been, 5 years since I've known you, and I finally have the last name down. Mani started his programming career when Y2K was still a thing, and has worked a variety of technologies, client-server, web, and a brief stint as an embedded firmware developer. I didn't know that. That's fascinating. He's been working on Drupal and web technologies since 2007. He's passionate about cloud-native architecture and DevOps practices, and now he's going to tell us all about application monitoring. Take it away, Mani.
Quickly split my screen, or maybe I shouldn't. Give me 1 second, please.
Rockefeller Center was built in 1933. It's 850 feet tall. And the first Rockefeller Christmas tree was there before the building was complete. And oh, that's right, today is Manhattan Henge. Yeah. Manhattan Henge is when the grid of Manhattan lines up with the sun setting or rising. I think this week it's the setting. So if you stand right on like 42nd Street, you actually see the sun go down with 42nd Street. Yeah. All right, Mani, you good? Or should I keep talking?
I just want to get something right. Maybe if you go into full screen. Okay. All right. Okay. My name is Mani Soundarajan. I'm a technical architect at Cinderwood. We're a small.
Talk into the microphone.
Is it okay? Yeah. All right. My name is Mani Soundarajan. I'm a technical architect at Cinderwood. We're a small startup in New Jersey. We're focused on digital marketing. We do a SaaS product. I'd be interested in talking about that later if you want to catch me. So today we're going to be talking about application monitoring, right? And before we get into application monitoring, I also sort of wanted to. Okay. Not good. So I want to quickly, contrast that with infrastructure monitoring. And this is something everyone is familiar with, and I thought we'll talk about infrastructure monitoring and before we get into application monitoring. So what is infrastructure monitoring, right? So typically you have servers and you want to monitor the CPU utilization or the disk space or how much free memory you have and whether your HTTP on port 80 is still listening, right? So this is what infrastructure monitoring is. We're all very familiar with this. We've done this. If you have an ops team, then they've done this. Maybe just to get a feel, how many of you are familiar with operations or are doing operations? A few people. Okay, that's nice. All right. And some of you are developers, I hope. So, all right. Okay, so assuming that you're using AWS for your infrastructure, right? You have a product called CloudWatch, which is what most people use for infrastructure monitoring. So you would go in there, you would create a dashboard with CPU utilization and let's say free disk space and so on, right? And so you lay out all this dashboard. If you have an ops team with a NOC, then you probably have a big screen with all of these dashboards running all the time, people watching them, right? I come from a startup, but 3 people are there, so we don't have this much infrastructure or even this much resources to build all these dashboards and look at them. So we've taken a very low-key open source approach to this whole thing. So going back to AWS CloudWatch, right? So you have a way of setting up alarms in CloudWatch, right? So you would define a threshold, right, and say CPU overload when it's more than 90% for more than 2 periods, assuming a period is every 5 minutes, right? So more than 10 minutes, if your CPU is overloaded, then you want to trigger an alarm, right? And that alarm could result in various actions, like an email sent to someone to look into it, right? So this pretty much covers what infrastructure monitoring is. I just wanted to give you a quick intro to that, right? If you're a company that is running your own server and you don't want to use AWS CloudWatch because it's vendor locked in, or you run your own boxes in your basement, right? So there's some open source alternatives to this. I found CollectD and Nagios to be a really good combination. So you install CollectD on all your servers. It's going to collect metrics and report them into Nagios, and Nagios is going to it's Nagios. It's supposed to nag you when something goes wrong, right? So it nags you by sending emails and whatnot. So yeah, there's a pause button. You'll find it. So yeah. So now let's come back to application monitoring. In the context of Drupal, when we say application monitoring, what do we talk about? Does anyone have any thoughts? What would you want to monitor? Yes. Okay, nice.
Are you alive?
That is more infrastructure, isn't it? In terms of the service being up and the website being up. So this is application monitoring. So we're going to contrast that, right? So let's look at some of the examples. I'm sorry. Also infrastructure. Like, so would you want to, so when there is an alert, do you want to wake up a system engineer or do you want to wake up a Drupal developer? That's sort of the distinction. Yes.
Who's hacking my site?
Also operations. But that's the way I see it. You can choose to divide responsibilities the way you want to.
Failed login, it's the same thing.
No, that's yeah, okay, maybe, right. So let's look at some more examples, right? So page not found, right? This is more an application problem, not really a sysadmin's problem, right? If someone unpublished a very popular blog post, right, it's going to go into 404, page not found, and that becomes a responsibility of someone in the Drupal development team, maybe even the content team, but they would get escalated, right? But this is an application problem as against an infrastructure problem, yeah? How many number of users do I have, right? So we have a product where, you know, every subscriber is a Drupal user in our website. So if you count the number of users, that's the number of customers we have. So page execution time, right? So within specifically one Drupal page, how much time does it take to serve? And so on. So these are kind of metrics that we are tracking when we talk about application monitoring.
How many of these things can be reported by Google Analytics?
So Google Analytics works in the sphere of your browser, right? So it's basically a JavaScript that runs in your browser and reports more like analytics as well as profile on the person visiting your website, right? So if somebody visited your website from the US or Canada, right, you can track where they're coming from, you can track what kind of browser they have, whether it's a mobile device or a desktop, right? And you can track how much time they spent on your web page and so on. This is completely behind in your server. So Google has no insight into that, right? So, and also Google Analytics is outside looking in. this is you're on the inside looking in. So you have perspective into things that Google Analytics will not have insight into. Does that answer your question? All right. So these are the kind of metrics we are talking about, right? So what is the kind of application monitoring stack that we are using today, right? So in the base, you have a time series database. We are using Graphite. That's another popular option, InfluxDB. That's replacing Graphite in many applications, right? So a time series database is basically where your data is indexed by time, right? And it also is optimized for searching by time, where you say, give me everything in the last 24 hours, right? And since it's indexed by time, your query runs really, really fast, right? It also reuses the storage space based on time, so anything older than 60 days is thrown away, right? So you don't run out of disk space collecting all these metrics, right? It also collates data, right? Let's say the 1st of July, like this happened, right? So you have summary already built and ready-made for you to go look at a daily summary and so on, right? So that's what Graphite does, right? And in the tools layer, you have StatsD, right? Which is most of what we're going to be talking about today, right? So you also, your application, of course, is Drupal, right? Drupal talks to StatsD, and StatsD stores the data in Graphite. Then you're going to access this data in Graphite using Grafana, right? That's the front end we're going to use to see all the data that is stored in your database. Yeah?
So is it safe to say Grafana is to Graphite what PHP MyAdmin is to MySQL?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good comparison. Yeah. Except you get nice graphs and charts and everything. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's dig a little deeper into StatsD. So this concept originally started. So in 2008, Flickr started using an internal tool called Round Robin Database, which is the precursor to a time series database, right? They built this whole thing, right? And in 2012, Etsy took that idea and built upon that, and they released what is today StatsD. So it's really a product from Etsy. It's open source software, right? The key to this whole thing is the monitoring data is sent via UDP, right? Which contrast to TCP, takes very little time to send from one server to another, right? In TCP, when you want to send a particular information from one server to another, you need to have a series of handshakes between two servers. That takes a significant amount of time to establish connection to your monitoring server, and then you drop off an information saying, hey, somebody logged in, or somebody logged out, or somebody put in the wrong password, right? So it takes a lot of time to set up the connection, to send like 10 bytes, right? And then to close a connection, right? Whereas with UDP, it's more or less fire and forget, right? You just send the data and forget about it and move on, right? So when you have in your code a lot of these monitoring statements, it doesn't add to your page execution time. That's the key. We don't want our monitoring effort to slow down our page. We want that to be having a very minimal overhead, right? And with UDP, you can achieve this in microseconds, right? So you don't really see that effect on your page load time. So that's sort of the key behind this whole StatsD, right, and how it works. Unlike the Flickr version, StatsD comes with a pluggable backend. So you could use Graphite, or you could use Open Time Series Database, or you could use InfluxDB, right? So the backend is pluggable. You can feel free to choose what you like. So basically, StatsD is just a UDP server. It's listening on a certain port to incoming connections and storing the data in a database. It also does collation and aggregation of all the data coming in, right? StatsD has a lot of, it got client libraries in most of the popular languages. So if you're developing in Node or PHP, there are ready-made libraries for you to just add to your Drupal site, for example, and start calling that function. It's really simple to integrate into because they're ready-made libraries. So you won't be ever writing code, opening a UDP socket. That's all been done for you. You just call one function, and that's going to handle everything, right? In Drupal 7, there's a contributed module. So it's really, really easy to integrate into a Drupal 7 site. For Drupal 8, you have a package. Just use Composer to integrate that and start calling that function. It's quite simple. So the other components in the stack, right? So Graphite is a time series database. We spoke about that. Grafana is the front end to viewing your time series database. So we're going to see a demo in some time to see how that works. And Boson is an alerting tool. I'm not going to go very deep into that in this presentation, but we're going to talk about it as we, towards the end of the talk. So how do you go about installing all of these, right? So the various components in the stack use various languages. Like one of them is Node, the other is Ruby, and one is a Go binary. So it's like a mix of languages. And if you're going to install it in one server, it's going to be really painful. So the easiest way to do this is to use Docker images, right? Docker images come with everything you need to run that particular software in your stack, right? So if you run the Graphite and StatsD, so this interestingly is a combination of two software in one Docker image, right? So you can just take that one image and run it, right? It's going to give you both in one package, and it's got everything it needs to run on it. So it's got Node.js and whatever it is Graphite runs on, right? And Grafana is having an official Docker image, and so does Boson, right? So we use Rancher to orchestrate our Docker containers. If you've heard of Kubernetes, it's similar to Kubernetes, right? So when you set up a monitoring stack, this is how it looks, right? So it's really simple. It's just 3 clicks, create service, create service, create service, and you create the services and list out which ports, what is listening on, and it really takes like 30 minutes to set it up.
Something like New Relic, is it anything like any of this, or?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is the open source equivalent of what you would do with New Relic, right? So absolutely, yeah. That's a commercial product, and this is an open source approach to that, yeah. So it's really simple to set up the stack if you're using Docker. If you want to do it on a specific virtual machine and install all of the software, it's going to be painful. You need to get the exact version of Node.js right and the exact version of Python right and so on, right? So if you take the Docker image, you'll save yourself a lot of trouble, right? It's all been set for you. So, right. Let's talk about how we get started in a Drupal 7 site, setting up application monitoring, right? So this is a contributed module I was talking about. It's StatsD, drupal.org/project/statsd, right? You're going to download it, put it in your project folder, and go into admin modules, and in the bottom you see that's just enable it, right? So that's as easy as getting things started in Drupal 7. Now you need to configure it to point it to your StatsD server. That's the next step, right? So you go into configuration. Obviously you'd enable it, right? You need to point it to the host and port where your StatsD is listening to incoming connections. It's really important that you open this port for UDP, right? Typically, you're used to opening ports on TCP, but you got to go make sure that the UDP port is open for 8125 on the machine where this is running, right? So this is the bulk of the configuration. In terms of the host, I would strongly advise you to keep it private inside your VPC. If you have one, don't open it to the world, of course, right? So which is why we have a 10 dot series of IP, not the external public IP. So this module comes with some interesting built-in metrics it captures. So you can go ahead and enable all of them. User events like successful login, failed login, page views. You also get page execution time and memory usage, and watchdog events, right? So in watchdog you have error, warning, info, right? So all of these are captured automatically and sent to StatsD. So you have something to start with, even without writing code, right? So this module comes with a few things you can start monitoring already, right? So more configuration, sampled rate, right? So if you have a really high traffic site sending a lot of information, at Drupal side, you can start collating them and sending only a sample of everything that's being collected, right? So if you entered 0.1, then you're only sending 10% of what is being collected. So you don't end up with a whole lot of data on your Graphite database to look at, right? So we're a small organization. We don't mind capturing everything. So we're doing one, which is 100%, right? Prefix, if you're using multiple projects in the same database, you would want to have your metrics separate based on your project name. So I'm using my project name, send over here. Suffix we're not really using. You can go ahead, use one if you want. So what are the kind of data we can collect and look at, right? So the simplest one is a counter, right? It just counts as things happen, right? It is a really good use case for counting events, things that happen on the fly, right? So like a user login, right? Or a failed login attempt, or a page not found, or a customer canceled, right? They logged in and said, I'm closing my account, right? Or a cache clear event. Yes.
So if the data in question is being stored in Graphite, which is a time-based database, and you're using an increment type of data, is it an increment for all time, or is it an increment just for the, let's say, 60 days you're keeping the data? Like,
it's an increment to the time you're viewing it. So when you view it, if you're going to say, give me 60 days, it's going to decide an interval that's broken into the period of aggregation.
so
it's
if there has
gonna
been no cache clear in the last 60 days, then it would be 0.
Yeah,
But if there have been 4 in the last 60 days specifically,
it'll be 4.
there will be 4, as opposed to an all-time thing.
Right.
Okay.
That's a different thing we're going to come to later in this talk. Yeah, that's the next slide. So the counter is basically, so when you're looking at 5-minute data for the 60 days, in that 5-minute window, you have 4 cache clear events happening, let's say, right? The next 5 minutes, the counter is back to 0, right? So when you aggregate it per 5 minutes, for that 5 minutes, its counter is 4. The next 5 minutes, the count is back to 0.
Got it.
It's it's like a group by thing where you
Got it.
aggregate it by a time slice.
Yeah.
So the count is based on that. So when you have a Drupal site sending all this information to StatsD, StatsD is going to wait, collate it every 60 seconds, and count that many events, write it into the database, and then start at 0 again for the next 60 seconds. So that's something you configure on StatsD and say every 60 seconds write to the database.
Or every 5 minutes, or every
Or 5
1
minutes,
hour,
yeah,
or whatever,
yeah. That's configurable on your StatsD installation.
Right.
Yeah. So these are the kind of events we can capture using counter. Think of things that happen on the fly, and I would use the word event, right? It's good to capture events. And here's an example, right? Just one line of code, statsd_call. I'm using user events dot cache API clear. So dot is a separator where you can logically group your counters, right? So I'm using user events, and in other places in my code, I'm using user events dot something else, right? So they all get collected into user events, and then under that you have cache API clear. I'm incrementing it by 1. You can also decrement if you have a use case for that, right? And you could increment by 10 or 100 if you have a use case for that, but typically most places you would just increment by 1 to say the cache was cleared, right? So when does a cache, so in this case is cache API clear, so we have our own custom cache bin, cache_API, from which we serve all our JSON API, REST API data, right? So when new content is published or existing content is unpublished, we manually go and blow up this cache bin, right? Because we don't want to serve old JSON data that's stored in there, right? So when this happens, our performance takes a hit, obviously, because your cache bin is empty. The next time someone's requesting the API, it's going to take a little more time. So we want to see in our application monitoring at what time did we blow up the cache and whether it had an impact or not, right? So this is how we capture a counter, right? So what we're going to do now is see if a demo works. If it works, then I'd like to see in the demo. Otherwise, I have screenshots to show to everyone, right? So let's come back here. See if we can switch. Right. All right. Okay. Maybe I need to zoom in. Is this good? Is it okay? All right. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is make sure our data source is set up correct, right? So this is Grafana, by the way. This is the front end through which we are looking at our data, right? So this is the Grafana front end. Maybe I should log out and start over, or maybe not. Not in a demo. No, I'm not going to log out.
We all know how to log in.
Yeah, so we've set up GitHub-based authentication. So we don't need to have another username password to remember, right? So you can just log in via GitHub. That way, everybody in your GitHub org gets access to the data. Data sources, right? So I've already added this, so we can just go in and have a look at this, right? So this database is of type Graphite, right? The name, you can give whatever name you want. Now, there are other kinds of time series databases supported by Grafana, right? So you can directly plug into your AWS CloudWatch and run your dashboard off of that, or you could use Graphite like I've used, or InfluxDB, or OpenTSDB, or Prometheus, right? So you have a bunch of options available. So this is what I meant by pluggable backend, right? So you can use whichever time series database you're using behind, and then build Grafana on top of that. You can build your dashboard on Grafana on top of that. The main thing is, where is your Graphite hosted, right? So this is an internal URL, right? Sindhu.internal. It's not visible to the world because all of this is behind our VPC, virtual private cloud. So you can't access the database from the public world, right? So it's hidden behind. So this is basically how you set up the data source. Once you've set up the data source, let's go create a dashboard, right? So before we do that, I just want to quickly see, this is called Ravi. Right, it's called user events.cache API clear. Okay, I just want to check that. All right, so let's go make a new, create a new dashboard. Right, settings. All right, so we have a new dashboard. We're going to go add a new graph, right? So you would add, yeah, so you have a lot of different widgets in your front end. Graph is the simplest one, right? So you'd add a graph, right? The first thing you need to do is select your data source, right? So that's your graphite.sindhu4, which I added first, right? That's my data source. Now we need to select the metric you want to graph out, right? So it's stats dot Sindhuit dot user event dot cache API clear, right? So you immediately see some data that's coming up in the last 6 hours. So this is a time scale, last 6 hours, right? So there have been some cache API clear that happened today, right? So this is how you go ahead and add a metric into a graph, right? Let's go ahead, save this. Okay, there are some things you can configure here. For example, the legend, right? It says, the whole stats dot Sindhuit dot user events dot cache API clear, which is not nice. So you could set an alias for that. So let's see, an alias, we'll just call it cache API clear. Yep.
So my question before, you said that you can configure statsd to have whatever aggregate time you want. Let's say you configured it to be every 5 minutes. In here, could you pull up a different aggregate time, or is it only what statsd was like?
No, you can change it. So it's
Okay.
going to send the query back to Graphite. So Graphite is like a SQL query kind of thing, right?
Right.
So it's going to write a different query and group by a different number. But you can't get a finer resolution than what you aggregated.
So I can't go from, if statsd is 5 minutes, I can't say give me 1 minute.
No.
Got
No.
it.
Yeah. But you can go for a broader aggregation. But you can't go finer than what you've configured to capture. So imagine your database, you have a record every 5 minutes. You can't say give me every 1 minute. We've lost that information.
Do you have to, if you go further out, does it have to be in an increment of, like, if statsd is set up for 5 minutes, can I set this to 5 minutes and 3 seconds?
No.
It could be 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15
So
minutes?
you don't control the period that is determined by Grafana. You just control the time range you want. So for example, you're looking at the last 6 hours here, right? Let's click on this, and this is how you change your x-axis, right? So you can choose the last 24 hours, right?
Okay.
It's going to intelligently decide how it's going to break up the data without
Got it.
getting choked with a lot of information. So Grafana is going to make the decision for you. You don't control that, right? So when you say last 24 hours, That's all the data we have in the last 24 hours. Of course, there's not much happened in the night, right? In the day, we had some activity and so on, right? Or maybe in the afternoon. All of this is in UTC. We're going to talk about UTC in a bit, right? So we would want to, yeah, you can change the color if you want, right? And let's save this, right? And go back to the dashboard. Right, so we have now one widget in our dashboard. We're going to keep building different kinds of metrics as we go through the demo, right? So let's go back to the, does anyone have any questions up to now? All right. Okay, so this is a counter, right? Events that happen, you counted them, right? The numbers on the y-axis don't make any sense because that's how, when you aggregate it across a time period, it gets divided. It's not a count of one, it's one divided by how many ever seconds, let's say, right? That Grafana decided to split it into. That's why the number is 0.005 cache clears. That doesn't make any sense, but we know that there's a cache API clear event that happened at that time, right? So you sort of look at it for the bigger picture, not really for exactly how many, right? If you want to count exactly how many, we're going to look at the next slide to see what that's about. So let's go back to our presentation. All right. So we saw how to add a data source and the cache API clear. All right, now we're going to talk about gauges, right? This is a second type of metric you can measure, right? A gauge is typically a number that's based in your database, right? So compared to a counter, counters are on-the-fly events that happen, whereas gauge is like something that's a solid number and it's coming from your database, right? So things like number of users, right? So you can do select count star on your database, get all your users, and that would be, you would use a gauge to count that. You don't increment or decrement. Typically, we put these queries in a hook underscore cron, right? So you set it to run every 5 minutes, let's say, right? So every 5 minutes, we run this query, we find out how many active users we have, and push that into stats.d, right? And then you could graph it and see if you're getting more users or less users, right? So you could also look at things like number of published articles, right? So if you suddenly have a drop in number of published articles, then maybe somebody made a mistake, right? And so on, yeah. You could also do any complex query in your database that results in a number. You could take that number and push it into stats.d. It doesn't have to be number of users and number of published articles. It could be anything you can think of. As long as it's a query that gives you a number, you can push that number, right? So here's an example. We are counting the active users, right? We write a DB query select count from users where status equal to 1, right? That will give me one number, which is the number of active users we have, right? And then we're going to push it into stats.d. So it's stats.d underscore call users.active, right? So under users, I have other metrics I'm collecting, right? So which is why I divide them and put them users.active. So it's like kind of like a folder separation, let's say, right? So you have like a user folder and then the active count under that. So, and we're using the word gauge because this is a gauge. This is not a number that stats.d has to aggregate. This is the truth. Just take it and put in the database. It's not something you need to collate and aggregate, right? And the variable, of course, active users count, that has the value, right? So this is the kind of code we've written. Now let's go and visualize the data, right? So we're going to go back into demo mode, right? Let's see what's happening. Just want to quickly check. We call it users.active. Okay. So let me go add, let's add a new row. Nah, I'm going to put in the same row. Add a panel, add a graph, right? Okay, I need to select my data source, graphite. I need to select my metric, stats.gauges, under gauges Cinderwood, users, active, right? So there we go. Those are the number of active users we have in the last 24 hours. We got a few customers and then we lost a few customers. So that's basically what happened in the last 24 hours, right? And we ended up a little bit more than how we started yesterday, right? That makes sense to everyone? The graph, yeah? All right. So we are now 4,000 700 customers or thereabouts. Let me just go see what's happening here, right? Okay. 4,714 customers. All right. So let's go ahead and give this a title, active users, right? And yeah, of course, this legend, you want to fix this. It looks bad. So right? Okay. And we save this back to the dashboard. Right, yeah. So this is the number of users in the last 24 hours. Of course, you could change this and see the bigger trend of what's been happening. Right, so that's over the last 2 months, right? We had a big push at this time. We got into new verticals and expanded, and we got a whole lot of customers from that. So this gives you a good view of, hey, when did we do that webinar again, right? It was in the beginning of June, obviously, right? Because that's when we had the surge in customers, right? So it's also good. So Grafana and this whole application monitoring is not only for a Drupal developer, it's also interesting for the marketing and sales department. If you build the right dashboard for them, right, they get insight into application that normally they would not have, or they would rely on a developer to give, right? And developers are busy and they won't get the data, right? So when you build a dashboard, our marketing team looks at this, they don't even come to us, right? So they look at this and they know what's happening, and they zoom in and they see like, hey, what the hell happened? We lost a whole bunch of customers on this day, right? And then we go and dig in and see like what happened, right? In this case, we caused this. A whole lot of credit cards declined, and when credit card declines, we give them 2 or 3 reminders and then we shut down their account. So this was us causing the dip in number of active users. But we also lose customers, and then we go and see a trend, and then we talk to them and find out what they're upset about, right? And then we try and fix them, and they go into a campaign where we try to bring them back on board and so on, right? But this gives you good insight into when things go wrong, we should know about it, right? When you lose 10 customers in a day, you should know about it, right? So this is also interesting for not just developers. You know, you have your business people. If you build a dashboard for them, it's interesting for them. So back to the presentation. This is a gauge, right? So numbers from your database, that's the key here, right? So if you can write a query and get a number, you can push it as a gauge and put it in a graph and measure that. All right, so. Oh, wait. All right. So I just had some screenshot of this prepared in case the demo was not going well. All right. The next kind of metric we can capture using StatsD is what is called as a timer, right? So these are used to measure time taken for processing. So things like the entire page, how much time did we take to render the entire page, right? So you could put so it's basically consists of 2 statements, right? You have a start and end, and you subtract it and push it into StatsD, right? So you could also look at a specific function. At the top of the function, you put start time. At the end of the function, when you're returning, you capture the end time, you subtract it, find the time difference, and you push that into StatsD, right? So this is a code block that we have, right? We have not written a custom code for this. I'm using what came with the module, right? Neil, you have a question? No? All right. So the module came with this code, right, where it measures the time taken for a page, the execution time of a page, right? So the start is actually pushed into a Drupal static, so you can access it from a different place and so on, but I've simplified it here, right? The end is in hook_exit, the start is in hook_boot, and in hook exit, of course, you subtract it, end minus start. Grafana and Graphite look at time as in nanoseconds, so you need to multiply this by 1,000 to go from microseconds to nanoseconds, and then you store this. So we're going to store it in performance events dot execution time, right? And look at this. So, and this metric is a timing, right? Timing is something that's used by the client library, but StatsD calls it as a timer, right? All right, so we're going to quickly jump back into the Grafana, right? So this is performance events dot execution time. All right. So let's add a new row. right? Add a panel, graph. We choose our data source, stats, timers, right? Under timers, we have Cinderwood. That's a prefix for everything we measure, right? That's my project name. And under that, we have performance events. Under performance events, we have execution time, right? There are various ways of looking at it. I'm just going to take a mean of a given time slice, right? When you have like one outlier, it's of course going to get aggregated down, but when you see a larger trend, it won't aggregate down. It's going to aggregate up, and you will see it shoot up in your graph, right? So this is sort of how it looks. Everything here on the y-axis is in milliseconds. So typically our page is under 250 milliseconds, which is good, but sometimes we go more than 1 second. So there are times when that happens, right? So let's go ahead and save this. We'll call this execution time. Yeah, we also want to change this. Right. Save. Back to the dashboard. I'm going to do one small change here. So this execution time is spanning the whole screen. I just want to bring it to half the screen so we can look for an interesting pattern. So edit, general, span 6, right. So when you lay it one below the other, you can have interesting conclusions. Let's go back and look at the last 1 week, right. So you can see that the times, sometimes, not always, sometimes when we blow up the cache, the execution time peaks, right? So it's not a correlation all the time, but some of the time, right? So you can see how blowing up the cache affects your execution time, right? So it's interesting if you lay out all these graphs near each other, you can draw comparisons, you can find patterns on what's happening here that's affecting what's happening there, right? So let's go back. So this is a timer, right? So let's go back and look at the code one more time. Right, so you capture, the micro time is a PHP function that gives you time in microseconds, right? Time gives you in seconds, micro time gives you a higher resolution. So you capture the start time, you capture the end time, then you subtract it, convert to nanoseconds, and then you push it into stats_t, right? And the key is here, call it a timing, not an increment or a gauge, right? That's the difference here. All right, so we have some other kind of graphs other than these three, right? So we've seen in the widget, there are many kinds of widget. You could have things that look like a car dashboard with a needle if you want to build a dashboard fancy that looks like that, right? Something that we found interesting is to use a world map to see where our customers are from, right? So you would have to write a query, right? This is also something that comes from a database, right? So from that point of view, it's a gauge, right? So if you see here, we're using the word gauge here, right? What we're doing here is writing a group by query, right? It's a complex query, but what we're doing is we're taking all our active users, finding out their business address, finding out the country in this case, field business address country is a 2-character country code. It's not the name of the country, it's like US for United States and CA for Canada and so on, right? We group by this, find the count of users from that country, right? Now you have your query result. We're going to loop through them, right? And then for each country, we're going to push out its own statistic. So you'll have users.country dot and the name of the country, right? So it's broken down, but there is a way to aggregate it back in Grafana, right? So users.country.United States, we have so many users, and Canada, we have so many users, and so on, right? So you're basically looping through and pushing it, right? This we put in a hook_cron, so every 5 minutes, we have this new data captured and sent to stats_t, right? So we have data from a production. Let's get out of the presentation mode and go look at how this is done. So let's go ahead and add a new row, right? Add panel. This time, instead of a graph, I'm going to choose a world map panel, right? Because that's what we're interested in visualizing, right? So, right, now we need to choose, let's go to metrics, database source is this, hang on 1 second. I forgot what I'm measuring.
You don't get to
dot-
choose which world.
No, just this one.
Just this one.
Yes, this one. There is a US only option. I've not played with it, but yeah, it's a world map or the US map. Yeah. So I just wanted to look at the metric. It's called users.country. Okay, and it's a gauge, right? So we're gonna go for stats, gauges, Synduit. That's a project name. Users, country, and under country, I want everything, right? So I don't want one specific country, I want everything, right? And now, there's something I needed to do here, alias by node 5. Yeah, so alias by node 5 basically means the metric, look at the 5th node. So it's stats dot gauges dot synduit dot users dot country dot whatever, right? So if you, I think it's indexes from 0, right? So the 5th one is what we're looking at, alias by that, right? So it's going to now look at all those countries' information and throw it up here, right? So you can see a bulk of our customers are from the United States, right? Let's go ahead, save this, and then have a look at this. All right, let's call it customers worldwide and save it back to the dashboard, right? The map is not zoomed in right, it's not the right height, so I'm just going to go to a dashboard that I already have prepared, right? And I spent a lot of time configuring it so the entire world appears in one full screen, and I don't want to spend time configuring that right now. So I'm going to go ahead, jump into a dashboard we already have. So there you go, right? So this gives a really interesting perspective on where our customers are and where our business should be focusing on, right? So obviously bulk of our customers are from the United States, but so this color gives a breakup of how many customers in that country, right? So we can configure this. Let's quickly go in and see how to do that, right? Edit. Okay, here's your threshold and your threshold colors, right? So you have two thresholds, 10 and 20, right? And you have these 3 colors, yeah? So red is anything less than 20, blue is between 10 and 20, and green is more than 20, right? So these are the thresholds. You can play with the thresholds that any way you want, right? So back to the dashboard, let me refresh the screen. So there we go. So we can see that there's a lot of interest from the United Kingdom, right? We have 16 customers, and Philippines is also interestingly interested in our product, right? Other than this, we know that we're doing well in Australia, right? And in Canada, right? So this also gives a good perspective to the marketing team to get insight into where the customers are coming from and what we can do to, get more customers from that geography if we choose that, right? You can also throw a table in here, right? Let me go back. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to show you how it's done. Where's that? Drupal NYC, right? Add panel, right? You could do a list, a table, right? So you could set up a table and point it to the correct metric, and you'll get it in a table form instead of a graph form or a world map form, right? So this is a different kind of graph, right? Let's go back. Interpretation, right? So now that we have all these metrics that we are collecting, there are some interesting ways of looking at it, right? So this is where the thinking part comes, right? Once you've started capturing for some time, you can go in and start looking for patterns. So if you see in Drupal watchdog log, every 404 is logged as a warning, right? So you can see a match between when we get a lot of 404s and when we get a lot of warnings in the watchdog. You can see the spike is correlating, right? So you know that this is not someone who made a mistake in a PHP and getting a lot of warnings in the code. This is just 404 reflecting in the watchdog, right? So it's interesting to look at graphs when you keep them close to each other in the same dashboard, you can look for patterns like this, right? Another one is, we've seen this before already, right? So how does cache API clear affect execution time, right? You can see that sometimes there's a correlation, not all the time, right? But you have to remember that a cache API clear does not immediately result in an execution time increase. Like, we've cleared the cache, but maybe it was in the evening 5 o'clock and nobody requested for the page till next day morning. So you would see the peak 8 hours later, right? Like, you clear the cache at 5 o'clock and nobody visited the page, right? We rebuild the cache only on the next page hit. So sometimes you would see an offset between cache API clear and execution time when it peaks, right? So here's another example, right? This is what we call a fingerprinting attack, right? So you have bots that crawl your website looking for entry points. It's fingerprinting to see whether you are a WordPress site or a Drupal site or a Microsoft SharePoint site, right? So it hits known URL endpoints like wp_admin, right? That's a known WordPress login page, right? Or /user in the case of Drupal. And for Microsoft, that's one, right? So if you look at these bots, right, they attempt 500, 600 URLs, right? That ends up with a peak of 404 that doesn't come down for a whole 30 minutes, right? This attack started at, I'm going to say 11:45, went on till 12:30, right? That's 45 minutes of the bot just hitting our site with like all kinds of crazy URLs it's trying to explore. Yes?
So if you have an issue with downloading viruses, let's say in a specific IT group, can you correlate these bot attacks with the downloading of the viruses so that you can establish an association between that it's due to these bot attacks in part?
So the bot attack is not specifically with respect to downloading a virus. The bot is trying to enter our server, right? And is looking for a vulnerability in our server and in our application, right? So the downloading of the virus happens after your server is compromised, right? Yes. Yes, of course, absolutely. If you went back and saw enough, for example, if you saw for the last 30 days, then you would see that there was an attack, a peak in the last 30 days, and then they took some time to get into the server, install the virus, and have it spread, right? Let's say they took a day or two to get that figured out, right? So maybe you see the people started downloading on July 11th, right? But the attack happened on July 7th or 6th, whatever, right? So depends. A person who is compromising your server does not necessarily have to use it to distribute a virus immediately. They could keep it for later, right? They've gained access to your server, and they're going to hold on to it for later. Like oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you can. If you have an event to investigate off of, right? Otherwise, your only knowledge of something going wrong is looking at these graphs. If nobody complained to you, you would not know about it, right?
Well, the head of the IT department
they would if the attacker installed a virus and have that distribute through your website. Then people would complain, your IT department will know about it, then they'll go look at it, right? So let me go back and talk about.
Not my site; it's a potential client.
Of course,
I'm just pointing out this is very interesting.
Oh yeah. So a quick side note: when Drupal Geron happened, right, a couple of years ago, we've had a whole bunch of websites compromised. It was a SQL injection attack, right? So people would write SQL queries in your URL and inject. This was a very sophisticated attack. They created a user role, and then they went and enabled every single checkbox in the permission matrix. And then they created a user based on that user role, and the user name was Drupal admin because nobody would want to delete that user. It's Drupal admin. You don't want to mess with. It's not hacker 103, right? So it's called user. It's called Drupal admin. It's a very creative, very nice attack, and it compromised a bunch of our websites, right? And a couple of them, I've left them alone to see what happens. So far, nothing has happened. It's a compromised site, I know, and it's running, I know. But they've just collected it and they've kept it. Maybe they'll use it another day. Maybe they're selling it. We don't know, right? So it doesn't have to start giving out a virus immediately, right? A lot of these people, they want to get into your, not your Drupal application, but into your server. And once they get into your server, they install what is called as a botnet, right? CNC, command and control, right? So they have a botnet control, and now your server has become part of their network of bots, right? And typically, they would have hundreds and thousands of these machines controlled by one, CNC center, and they would use that to launch attacks. They would, so their CNC server will not be caught, if at all, right? They will be using your server to do their activity, right? So, a virus coming out of, or maybe a whole lot of spam email going from your server, any number of things, right? So, servers that I've seen compromised, they didn't do anything with it. They just compromised it and kept it. They're sitting on it. I don't know what for. So, that's also a possibility. Yeah. So here we see a fingerprint attack going on, right? And obviously, it's reflected in the watchdog, right? And when we go and see, couple of things we usually do. We try to find out the IP address from which all of these hits are coming, right? The fingerprint hits, like, are you WordPress? Are you SharePoint? Are you Drupal? Are you this, that, right? So if it's coming from one IP address, it's very simple. We do IP tables -j drop and the IP address. We just drop all packets from the IP, forget about it, move on, right? There's an automated way of doing it. It's called fail to ban, right? So you basically take all your logs, write a fail to ban configuration and say, look at my Apache logs, one IP address, 10 F404s, put them in the fail to ban, right? It's going to start banning that IP, and it has a progressive time-based banning. So it'll ban you for 30 minutes, but if you still do it, it's going to ban you for 2 hours. If you still do it, it's going to ban you for 24 hours, and so on, right? So fail to ban is a really good option if you want to automate this process of banning IP addresses, right? And you don't want to ban an IP forever, because a lot of these people are residential customers, and your ISP probably rotates the IP, right? So it's somebody else now using that IP, but you're banning them, right? So ban it on at times, like ban them for 24 hours. Right? That'll be a good starting point, right? So let's see. So here's a cool trick, right? Overlaying time period. Let's go and see a demo of this, right? So let's do cache API clear, right? Let's view this and view it for the last 24 hours, right? So what is a cache API clear? A cache API clear is when we publish new content, right? We blow up the cache so that whoever is requesting for content next is served fresh data, right? That's a cache API clear, right? This typically means our editorial team has been busy, right? They've been writing content, they've been putting it online, they've been hitting publish, and that's what this means, right? It means people in the creative and content team have been busy. That's what it means, right? Let's look for a pattern and look at it across 2 times, right? So we're going to edit this. We're going to add one more metric. The same metric basically, right? User events, cache API clear, right? But now, I'm going to do a time shift of 1 day, right? So to see, basically what you see in red is what happened in the last 24 hours. What you see in yellow is what happened the day before, right? So you're contrasting what happened today versus what happened yesterday, right? This gives you a really good, interesting view in comparing days. So let me go and show you some real data, right? We have in a dashboard. Okay, save. So this is the last 24 hours, right? What you see in green is today. What you see in yellow is yesterday, right? I've just changed the labels. It's basically the same thing, right? So yesterday we had a lot of users log in between 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock UTC, right? Which is late night for us, right? But today there was not that much activity late in the night, right? And in the This is 1600 UTC, 2 in the afternoon, right? So let's say lunchtime, right, 12 to 2. There's some activity yesterday, but today there's a lot more activity during lunchtime, right? Active session is basically a count on your Drupal session table to see how many sessions are active. Not an accurate depiction because your browser keeps the session open for 20 minutes before it considers the session as closed. So it's not really accurate, but it gives you a good perspective of how many people have logged in, if not already logged out, right? You get an idea of how many people access the site, right? So this gives you a good idea of what happened today versus what happened yesterday, right? And then you can look at it from a different point of view and compare days, right? So you do that by time shifting and overlaying the two data one on top of each other, right? And looking at it from that point of view. So let's go back. Let's talk about time zone, right? When it comes to monitoring, UTC is the only time zone to use. Like typically you have a geographically distributed team, and even if you don't, it's a good habit to use this because a lot of times people are like, hey, I have a spike in 404, what time? 8 o'clock. And then they're talking about Indian time, right? And I'm looking at Eastern time, right? And I don't see the spike in 404s. And what are you talking about, right? So you have all kinds of confusion that come from this. And then there's a madness of daylight saving time, which we won't go into, right? So UTC is the standard when it comes to application monitoring. Use this everywhere. Have a clock that has UTC nearby, right? So because our brains work in EST, right? But you need to know what UTC is at any point of time, right? So on my Mac, I have a UTC clock on the right that I can always refer to, right? So it's now midnight, right? It's over here, the last one, right? So helpful to have a UTC clock nearby, all developers especially, right? If you're going to be looking at logs, your Apache logs are in UTC, right? Drupal Watchdog converts it to your time zone, right? But if you look in the database, it's all in UTC, right? So helpful to look at this whole thing from a UTC point of view and talk, when you're talking to somebody else, say that there is a spike at 2 o'clock UTC, right? So it's very clear to everyone what time we are talking about, right? And all your dashboards, configure them for UTC, right? Unless you're building a business dashboard, right? Unless you're building a business dashboard for sales and marketing people, then give them EST or whatever that they want, right? But for developers and sysadmins, stick to UTC. So who looks at these graphs, right? We've built all these cool dashboards, but nobody ever looks at them, right? We've all done that. We built a nice dashboard and then never visited that again, right? So we have come up with certain processes, right? So first of all, who do you give access to, right? Like I said, give access to everyone, right? Developers, operations, sales and marketing, CEO, CFO, whoever, right? Give everybody access to data because this is going to give insight to them that you may not have looked at it from that point of view, right? A lot of times as a developer, I look at things from a very narrow focus, but maybe somebody from the sales team looks at a bigger picture and comes to me and says, hey, did you notice this, right? And then that could lead to either a feature or a bug or whatever, right? So give access to everybody, let everybody look at the information, right? And there's another thing that we do is as part of our stand-up, we spend 5 minutes on operations, right? We do what is called as an operations stand-up call, during the stand-up call, right? During the ops stand-up, we do this on Google Hangout, so it's easy to share screen. We don't do it on a phone, right? So the person, the Scrum Master, opens up his browser, goes to Grafana, opens up the dashboard, and we briefly talk about each panel for 10 seconds, right? So make this part of your process so you remember to look at the graphs every day, right? Otherwise, it's just graphs sitting out there, nobody's looking at them. It doesn't add any value to your business, right? So bring it into the process, open the dashboard, talk about it for 10 seconds, right? What happened yesterday with the 404s? Or why did we have less users logging in yesterday? And so on, right? So make it part of your process. So we're going to very briefly touch upon alerting, right? So you have all these graphs, and if you look at it, you can take action. But if you don't look at it, you don't know about it, right? So that's not really helpful, right? I mean, for a company like us, we don't have people sitting and looking at graphs all day. Like we have like 3 people who are developers, right? So we use alerting tools, right? So why do we need them, right? So we need them so they can go look at these data on a constant 1-minute basis And if something interesting is happening, they can trigger an alert, then somebody can go have a look at it, right? So we would set a threshold, we would create alarms, right? And so this is what alerting is about, right? We also have the possibility of triggering third-party tools. Like you would want a message in your Slack channel saying, hey, this is happening right now, right? 404s have crossed a given threshold, right? There's too many 404s happening right now, right? This kind of real-time information and alerting someone is what alerting tools are for, right? So let me quickly go back. We are looking at two tools. We have not finalized on one. The latest version of Grafana comes with alerting, which makes it really interesting. You can set everything up in one place. You could take a metric, you could define a threshold, and you could say, who do you want to email if this threshold is crossed, right? So it's kind of like AWS CloudWatch, but for your application, right? So if too many people canceled in a day, right, you could have an alert go to the sales team, right? And they would know about it. They would see the email, they would see it in a Slack channel. The information will get given to people who can then act on it, right? Otherwise, if it's in a graph, we're not looking at it, right? So Grafana latest version 4.x is good. We're also looking at Boson. This was created by Stack Exchange, right? Boson is another way of creating alerts. So in Boson, you basically define a threshold that will then show you in the last 60 days how many times this event happened, right? And then you could tweak with your threshold, right? Otherwise, you're going to have either over alerting or under alerting, right? If you define the threshold too low, you're going to get an email every 5 minutes, right? If you define it too high, you've missed an important event, right? So Boson is interesting because you can play with the threshold and look real time how many alerts this would have triggered in the last 60 days, right? And then you could arrive at a good threshold and save that and say, okay, when it goes beyond this threshold, email everybody, put it on Slack, wake people up, and so on, right? You also have integration with PagerDuty and things like that. So you can actually have someone paged and they get a call and a text message and so on, right? So you have those integration options possible with Boson. So this is about alerting, and that's about what I want to talk about application monitoring. So any questions? Yes.
Was this a cost-effective solution, basically, instead of going with CloudWatch and with the alerts built into it?
So CloudWatch is at the infrastructure level. For application monitoring, you're talking about New Relic or an equivalent, right? I'm not sure about the pricing, but for a small company, it can really run up. And New Relic, I think, charges based on CPU, how many CPUs you have on your box and how many boxes you have. So it can really add up for a company like us.
Do you find that you're spending a lot of time, like, maintaining this? Or do
Not
you find
really.
that you've set it up, you're done, you never,
Very
I mean,
much.
you look at the data, but you never
Yeah.
have to look at it again.
Yeah, like unless we need a new metric, it's a simple pull request with one line. We throw it in there and say, okay, start counting this metric, right? And within a few hours, we start getting information and we look at the graph and then we can decide, right? So a lot of the times for debugging, think of it as putting a Drupal set message, right? Or a Drupal print message or whatever.
Right, but do you find that you're spending a lot of time, like, in the dashboards, tweaking and, oh, well, I want to look at this data a little bit differently, I want to, and
Not
or
really.
not really.
Not really. We do it as part of our stand-up. Quickly look at
Right.
everything, right? I look at each panel, spend 10 seconds, talk about it, right? And then move on. So we spend maybe 30 seconds a day looking at it. Unless you're specifically looking for something,
Right.
then you go dig deeper, look at the time scale, change it to the last 60 days, look at weekends, and so on, right? So unless you're looking for something specific, it takes 30 seconds in a day. You just have a quick look and make sure everything's fine. And in terms of setting it up, once you're set up, we've really not changed anything after we set up.
Anyone else? Questions, comments, concerns,
Jokes, poems?
comments?
So, just curious, in like what triggered the investment in doing this setup? Because it sounds like maybe there was something less robust before. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so one of the biggest statistic or metric we were after is how many customers we have, right? And that's something our marketing team is always interested in knowing. That reflects the revenue, the money we are making, basically, right? We're a SaaS product and everybody pays a certain amount per month, right? So you just multiply by 29 and that's our revenue, right? So there's a number we're all interested in the marketing team especially, right? So we would give them metric once a week when they ask us, maybe, if you're not too busy, right? So, and then they said, you know what, can you just do something so we get this number without bothering you? And that's when we started exploring application monitoring and looked at StatsD. We were about to write our own UDP, pushing out at the socket level, and we saw this, that's a module. Oh, that's so simple, right? So just use the module, put a checkbox, and get all your information. And any more metric you want to capture, it's one line of code, right? So that's how we started. We wanted to know how many customers we have. And that's how we started.
Can you see this being usable for a multi-site setup and like being able to select per site or see all the sites for group data?
Absolutely. Let's quickly go back to an older slide where we're configuring. So if you look here, we have the prefix. That's the name of our project, right? So if you had a multi-site, then you would give a different prefix for every site, right? And then you could have all your information in one place. And the interesting thing about that is now you can overlay data, right? From this project and that project. You can overlay them and see what happened in this project in the same time frame, what happened in that project, right? So you could look at it, or you can have panels one below the other and compare, right? So you can do interesting things. You can capture all of them as long as you have a good way of organizing your data, right? So if you put them all in one prefix, then your data all got mushed together, right? Then there's no pulling it out, right? But if you defined a proper prefix, a separate prefix for every project, then you can get at the data. In Grafana, it's also possible to aggregate. It doesn't mean that separate data is separate. You can aggregate multiple series. There are advanced options available. You can do a sum of these two series, right? Give me this and give me that and add them and give me now the total, right? So for whatever reason, if you wanted to do that, right? So you could aggregate across data series, right? So for example, you're talking about two brands within NBC, right? And page views, right? You could aggregate them and say, give me total page views for this brand, right? That's totally possible. Sorry?
How resource intensive is this? How resource intensive is this? Does it just
Not at all.
Does it just sit on top of your infrastructure, or you have to dedicate
So in terms of the code that we write, right? Let me quickly see. Right. So this is called instrumenting your code, right? You have your code that runs. Now you're instrumenting your code to measure what's happening in your code, right? That's instrumentation. The overhead added because of instrumentation is what we're talking about, right? So the StatsD module very intelligently collects all the information, right? Puts it in a static variable, and only when your page is served, it aggregates everything and sends it to StatsD. So in terms of your page view, right? So if you look at Apache, right, you have a PHP shutdown event, right? Your page is given to the browser, and now PHP is shutting down, right? At that time, this information is sent to StatsD. So it really does not affect your browser time to first byte, right? Because it happens in the shutdown event. So your time to first byte in the browser is not affected. But your instrumentation affects, right? Every time you want to add a StatsD call, right? But that's really just adding a data to a global variable. We're talking about nanoseconds, right? It's just one instruction, add this to an array in the global scope or a static scope, right? Nanoseconds, right, for instrumenting, and then to send it out microseconds, but that happens after your in your PHP shutdown event. So it really doesn't affect your time to first byte.
I guess technically, though, it would affect your memory usage because the static variable will grow.
It's a static variable. What are you capturing?
Well, I don't know what you're capturing.
That's a really good point. If you're going to put this in a for loop that runs 10,000 times, then
Right.
Yeah, that's a bad way of doing it. Then you're doing it wrong. Then you're doing it wrong, right? You should capture your metrics in a responsible way. You can't just put this in. Hey, I'm going to loop this through million records and capture a metric for every record. Then you're going to run out of memory.
I could see someone sitting there and saying, "Well, I'm going to put this in every function." Right? And be able to do back traces and things like that in a weird way.
That's a really good point, and it opens up a new topic. If you want to do something like that, you should be doing what is a Facebook product?
Xdebug?
Xdebug. No, not Xdebug.
XH Prof.
Blackfire, but
Blackfire is
XH Prof, right? So
Yeah.
Facebook came with the XH Prof.
Yeah.
That was going to instrument every function entry and exit automatically for you,
Right.
capture the time taken. The new cool thing is Blackfire, right? So if you're going that way, use Blackfire. They have a really nice interface to explore. It gives you intelligent insights into how your code can be improved, right? That's really good way of.
I
looking at
wasn't
your code.
suggesting that was a good idea, what I said, but just.
Right, you
like,
could do that.
I could see someone
do
doing that, and then
Right.
and then you would really be sucking up your memory
Oh yeah,
resource. real
but
quick.
if you're going to instrument every function, you should just use Blackfire, right? They instrument it for you. They do it at a very low level that they take up even less low overhead than if you write a PHP function, right? They're going to do it at a system level, right? So yeah, check out Blackfire. That's really cool.
Blackfire.
Blackfire.io.
Going once, twice.
I have an
no, I'm good.
afterthought,
Yeah, go ahead.
a postscriptum. Today, July 12th, is Save Net Neutrality Day. So if you're interested, have a look at battleforthenet.org
Org.
and also dearfcc.org. So you could send a letter to FCC from dearfcc.org. It's a nice template. You could just fill up, send a piece of your mind to Chairman Pai and let him have all your comments. Thank you.
An excellent postscript.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Manny. Woo! All right. So we had one talk. I think that was terrific. Thank you so much, Manny. The second thing that we were going to do in our remaining 15 minutes was do a Q&A, kind of any potpourri essentially of any Drupal questions, comments, interesting ideas, something new you learned recently that you want to share with the group. It's just kind of a bit of a loose conversation about your latest Drupal conquests. Does anybody have anything in particular they want to ask or share with the team? Yes, we have one. Wait.
There's a reference to a bot app and Drupal, so I don't know if anyone's working with that. It seems interesting.
I don't know. Is anybody doing any work with bots and Drupal? Here, where's the other mic? Let's get another mic. Who wants to also be a mic person so that we can all hear it? Thanks.
I don't do Drupal chatbots per se. I do a lot of work in chat ops. So a lot of our operations is run from our chat tool. We use Slack. So from the Slack channel, we cancel customers and so on. So if somebody has not paid and their credit card is declining for 2-3 times, we tell the chatbot to go cancel the customer. We can technically go to admin people, select the person, and click block the account.
But why?
But why? Right, yeah. So why do you want to do that when you can do it from Slack? The interesting thing is when you do this, it's part of a conversation that happens in a channel. Your colleagues know about it, other team members know about it, and they know, okay, they're canceling, and then they can, why are you canceling this person? Because credit card declined 3 times, right? So you can have a conversation around it if you do it from your chat channel, yeah. So yeah, if you're interested, have a look at Hubot, H-U-B-O-T. That's a really good bot. You can extend it to do many interesting things. Hubot, H-U-B-O-T, Hubot.
It's called Hubot.
Hubot. It's from GitHub. Yeah.
Yeah, the bot app that you're talking about doesn't block bots, does it? Because an interesting thing happened to me today. I was web scraping on StreetEasy, and it came back and said, "Oh, you're a bot," because I was running a scraper on the site, and so it blocked me and wouldn't let me scrape any data off the site. So I just wondered if there's any apps or modules in Drupal that people are thinking about putting in to recognize if a bot is hitting your site and blocking that query.
Interesting. Any responses, comments?
Well, I know of 2 different companies that have software that does that now. That it actually looks at your mouse movements and your keystrokes. And I don't know if
and it decides if you're a human being or
Yeah.
not. Yeah. it's one of the techniques being used to replace CAPTCHA, right? They've decided that they can tell based on your mouse movements and based on how long it takes you to actually click a button and all that kind of stuff, and say, oh yes, you are in fact the person without you having had to do anything.
But with AI, we could replicate that.
Maybe. Who knows? Anyone else? Neil, I'm going to put you on the spot. Anything fun and exciting coming on Drupal.org? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I wanted to add to the bot talk too.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. We use, so they're not Drupal bots, but we use a lot, we have chat bots at Do Something because we do a lot of text messaging with our members, and there's a whole conversation. So sometimes members will be like, help, or they'll be like participating in a campaign, or sometimes there's crisis like words like, I want to die, somebody's bullying me, and things like that. It's something that really happens. So we have...
So much so that Do Something actually spun off a completely separate nonprofit, which is this crisis text line, which, they recognize that their members were getting in touch with them for this kind of an issue via text. So anyway.
Yeah, and they have like actual counselors to help these young people. But the bot not only like accepts responses for people participating in campaigns called report backs, but also kind of moves people out to like solutions like Zendesk, so like speaking with a human to like get additional help, or also moving them to crisis text line for these kind of crisis kind of keywords. But something that we are exploring for more flexibility is a solution that uses something called Rive script, and it's just some simple syntax, kind of like a bot kind of language, chatbot language, that does some interesting, allows you to do some pattern matching with some of the keywords, have different bot responses, weight those responses and things like that, and you can group them by topics. And they're pretty human readable, so you can have potentially non-developers working on those responses as well. That's RIVE script.
So I just wanted to talk about what you said, that your scraping script was blocked by the server, right? So there are ways of getting around that, right? So if you're using wget, for example, you could pass a header and pass a user agent that looks exactly like Chrome. That will be the first step. I'm talking about from a different point of view of breaking that ban, right? So you would pass a user agent header, right? And then there's a parameter in wget called splay. It'll add a random time to every request. It's not like you requested one page and a millisecond later next page, a millisecond later next page. It'll take it delay by 8 seconds, then 3 seconds, then 10 seconds. It would randomize it. So. Right. Right. Okay. Right, yeah. wget has a lot of parameters you can pass to overcome this.
If you're using Python, are you using Beautiful Soup? Yeah, so if you use Beautiful Soup and Selenium, you should be able, if you use the Chrome driver, you should be able to pass, what do you call it, header information and all that stuff. So I know Street Ease is the one that's similar to Zillow, right? Like they're in the same space with Zillow, right? Yeah. And I've scraped Zillow before. I haven't done Street Easy, but yeah, you should be able to go around their bots.
Sounds like no matter how hard you try to prevent people from using your site, your publicly available site for something, they'll find a way around it. Go ahead.
Yeah, another tool to ban bots is fail to ban. It's a log parser, and it looks through your logs and picks out information and takes action on those. It's pretty low-level Unix tool. There's no UI for it that I know of, but yeah, we've been using that on Drupal.org for a few things because we do get people who think they can crawl the whole site.
There are several million pages on Drupal.org that
Yeah.
don't want to be crawled all at once.
New stuff on Drupal.org. We've been doing a lot of cleanup lately. Cleaning up we launched the new documentation section a few months ago, and there's still, phase 3 of every project, and then phase 4 and 5. Upgraded the Drush for packaging distributions, so that should help out some. We were still running a Drush 5 there.
Oh, okay. They're up to 8 now, for those who aren't sure. Actually, they're working on 9, so.
Yep. Yeah, Drush 8 is nice. And yeah, I've been doing a lot of CSS refactoring, and maybe the pages will load faster.
Okay. All right. Thank you, and especially for being put on the spot. Let's throw the question out this way. Who has downloaded a module recently that is interesting, that they didn't know about and was like, there's a thing? Nobody. Who uses Drupal? Anyone? Okay. No? Nothing interesting or new lately? Nobody saw, that was finally ported to D8, or there's that integration that we've been looking for. No? Wow.
I actually have a follow-up question for you, Neil. I was just curious about any feedback that you might have gotten around the changes for the security advisory.
Yeah, we've definitely can't think of any too much specific feedback right now. We didn't get that much feedback. The kind of main concern is people are going to install modules that are not secure, and that'll lead in time to more hacks of Drupal sites and more, that'll hurt the reputation of Drupal in the long run. So we're coming up on 4 or 5 months of that. We have
just to interrupt, what we're talking about is at the bottom of a module page where it actually says this module is supported by the Drupal security team or not. And basically, if you have a stable release of the module without dash, dev or alpha 1 or beta, whatever, then it gets the advisory that it's supported by the security team. And if you don't, it doesn't. So that's what we're talking about here. Keep going.
Yeah. So yeah, in general, we want people running modules that are supported by the security team, and releases of those modules are supported by the security team. And yeah, we'll be doing some looking at that the 6-month mark to figure out
did it work?
Yeah, did it? Are there more secure modules or insecure modules? That it's a hard problem to figure that out. Maybe that we'll see there's a clear correlation 6 months. something happened, but people built modules and really stable versions of modules for any number of reasons.
Part of it's a hard problem because it's partially just a culture question of whether people are going to release their module as a stable release just because they want to see that security advisory change.
Yeah, you get there's more positive feedback now on the page. You get a shield on your page saying it's secure. So hopefully that encourages people. And we're still looking at getting some of that feedback in core itself. So if you go to the update status page, it'll tell you these need security updates. These, maybe there's the potential for security updates, but how do you communicate that kind of, you want to be wary of those modules, but if that's the only option and you've done the due diligence, skim through the code yourself, you can run it safely enough.
Right.
But yeah, on the other hand, if you're a Drupal site builder, you're handing off sites with the dev releases of modules. Do you want your clients to be able to know that?
Right.
And or
and I could see both arguments very
Yeah.
strongly.
yeah, or if you inherited a site, do you want to know what you inherited?
Yeah. And a lot of this work was done as part of the effort to allow anybody to create a module up on Drupal.org, right? There was a very, very long period in Drupal's history where you could create, you either couldn't create a module at all, and that changed a couple of years ago when we switched to Git. Then you can create a module, but it was in this kind of sandbox state, right? Where it didn't get a proper name, so you didn't take up the namespace, and it was this kind of like quasi ability of people to create a module and put it up on Drupal.org. But recently, and this is part of that effort, anyone can create a module, call it a full, a full proper module, use the namespace, release, make a release. So once that happened, there was a need, I feel, from the security group, like, all right, now how do we handle that? Right? How do we make sure that that people aren't just putting up a module that's insecure for whatever reason, and we don't have the resources and whatnot to look at every line of code in every module. It's just not feasible. It's not scalable. So it was interesting stuff. Anyone else? Got any interesting questions? Some crazy site? Yeah.
This came out of something that I talked with Alex about last time, which was the domain access module, if you recall. And the reason that I was interested in it is that we are we're whosu.com and the .whosu top level domain, like .com, .net, .whosu. So we are looking right now, we're tossing around this idea of doing if anybody who's ever tried to whois on a domain name, everybody's got a different setup for where it is. So what we were looking at was you could put in, for example, nbcuniversal.com .whois. No, sorry, .whosu. My bad. And it would parse, we would run the service that it would parse, we would have .com .who's set up to parse backward and point it.
The ownership information of the
We would
NBC
do the routing from the second level, from the TLD .who's who to the server, because everybody's got a different setup, right? It's very hard to find it. Does anybody think there's any value in that, or anybody have any comments on that? I would just like sort of doing a little bit of. And it uses the same setup as the domain access. It's sort of that same methodology.
Sure, but I just want to try and repeat back and see if I got it. So if I went to nbcuniversal.com .who's who,
right,
the information I would see back would be the whois information that you would normally go to,
correct,
like some domain registrar and find out, oh, this is owned by Comcast Inc.
Correct. Exactly.
At 5.
Yes. It would route you to
Happy Street,
the whois server.
Philadelphia.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the idea. Does it sound like a useful thing?
Yeah. I mean, for anyone who's looking at that, anyone who's currently looking at the whois information.
Right. Because there's no standard for whois information, right? It's sometimes, like for example, if you're looking for whois information for .who's who, it's whois.nic.who's who.
So you're trying to make a phone book.
Basically, it's sort of a standard for a utility that people can put in a domain name .who's who, and it will route them to the information. And some people use CAPTCHAs, like our backend service provider is Newstar that does .biz, .us, and a couple of others, and so they use a CAPTCHA when you put in a whois. Now we can do, because if we whitelist our website, it will route it to them, and we can pull that information out without the CAPTCHA. Not everybody will want to do that, but we could always then just have it be a link to the site. That's what we're thinking of doing. And we're looking to do it because Who's Who is has a reference background. It's compatible to have a reference for domain names to do it, and that's why I'm floating the idea in front of you all, even though it's very new. Thank Thank you.
Anyone? Thoughts?
I mean, I think it's fine. I use it with a couple of proxy sites. They do the same thing where you just add. So after the URL, then you add their like whatever their proxy alias is, and then it reroutes you to that site. It's like a VPN proxy type of thing. I think it suffices for at least people who want to curl such information. You know, who want to use it in either in the command line or programmatically. I think it will be a good addition.
Thank you. All right. Thank you everybody for coming tonight. Oh wait, can we switch it back to the thing? And where did I put the thing with the thing? The thing with the stuff and the place with the guy. There you go. We did that. Next meetup, Wednesday, August 2nd. So typically this is the first Wednesday of every month. We changed it for July just because we figured that, you know, it would be just me standing up here with nobody at all on July 5th. Which, yeah. Wednesday, August 2nd, right here in this room. Please let us know if you would like to do a presentation, if you have something you want to talk about. It can be a quick lightning talk, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. It could be something more in depth, like what Mani did tonight. It could be a conversation, like what we tried to do there at the end. Yeah, let us know. So suggest something. Yes. Bill's Bar, entrance is on 51st Street downstairs. Go. Socialize. That's it. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Get out. Yay!